Remember when British comedies pushed boundaries so hard they fell off the edge? Once upon a time, sitcoms didn't just cross the line, they built their whole house on the other side. But what made primetime gold in the 70s, 80s, or even early 2000s would get shows yanked, re-edited, or publicly apologized for in record time today. Which so-called classic would never make it past a single episode now? Stay close, because some of these time capsule comedies make modern TV bosses break out in a cold sweat. Love Thy Neighbor, 1972 to 1976. Let's kick things off with a show so infamous, it's almost a parody of itself. Love Thy Neighbor hit British screens in the early 70s and went straight for what it called comedy about race relations. The setup: a white working-class couple sees their quiet suburban world turned upside down when a black couple moves in next door. What follows is a relentless back and forth of insults, stereotypes, and awkward silences, sometimes broken only by the studio audience's nervous laughter. The white character, Eddie Booth, tosses out every old cliché he can muster, and his neighbor Bill gives as good as he gets. Here's the thing. While some defenders argue it was all good-natured ribbing and tried to mock bigotry, the reality is the punchlines aged faster than an unwrapped sandwich on a park bench. Modern audiences would not just cringe, they'd stage walkouts. You'd see headlines before the first ad break. Did this really air? TV networks today wouldn't touch it with a 20-foot pole. If you want to understand just how much the world has changed, watch 5 minutes of Love Thy Neighbor if you can get through it. The show's legacy is a warning. What once passed as mainstream fun now lands squarely in the "What Were They Thinking" Hall of Fame. Mind Your Language, 1977 to 1979. Think learning English is tough? Try watching Mind Your Language without groaning. This late 70s sitcom took a group of international students trying to master English and cranked every national stereotype up to 11. You've got the passionate Italian, the shy Japanese student who confuses L's and R's, the endlessly polite Indian, and a teacher trying to keep the class together like a sitcom version of the United Nations. But there's no diplomacy here, just punchlines built entirely around misunderstandings and tired caricatures. What makes Mind Your Language a textbook example of what wouldn't fly today isn't just the broad jokes. It's the sheer joy the writers took in playing up the funny foreigner angle. Each episode is a parade of accents, cultural blunders, and gags about how silly everyone sounds when trying to speak English. Back then, people called it harmless fun and watched in droves. Now, it's a cringe fest for anyone under 50 and a red flag for anyone in the industry. Even the original run was cut short due to growing concerns about racism. Try pitching this concept to a modern streaming platform, they'd probably escort you out before you finished your first comedy accent. The show is a fossil, interesting for what it says about its era, but strictly museum only today. Allo Allo, 1982 to 1992. For fans of broad comedy, Allo Allo is legendary. For everyone else, it's a reminder that what once felt edgy now feels more like a minefield. The show is set in a French cafe during World War II and delights in poking fun at everyone. The cowardly French, clueless Germans, lascivious Italians, and resistance fighters with accents so thick you could cut them with a butter knife. No one is spared, but almost no joke lands softly. The gags are constant. If you're not dodging a French stereotype, you're ducking a German one, or watching the world's longest-running innuendo about a painting called The Fallen Madonna with the Big Boobies. Every episode is a farcical parade of cross-dressing, mistaken identities, and leering looks. The writers weren't aiming for subtlety, they wanted to hit you over the head with as many national caricatures as possible. Here's the kicker. While plenty still love its slapstick and ridiculousness, today's censors would have a field day. Jokes about nationalities, appearance, and anything remotely risque are now closely scrutinized. Allo Allo would need a legal team on standby just to get through a script reading. If you think modern comedy gets too safe, try explaining "you stupid woman" as a catchphrase to a modern audience and see how fast the mood changes. Nostalgic, yes. Cancelable, absolutely. It Ain't Half Hot Mum, 1974 to 1981. This is the comedy that the BBC itself seems eager to forget, and you'll understand why after a single episode. It Ain't Half Hot Mum drops you into a British Army entertainment unit in colonial India during World War II, where the cast is mostly white, the jokes revolve around race, and several characters are played in brown face. Even by the standards of its day, the show was controversial, but it was still a ratings hit for years. Watching it now is like flipping through a photo album and realizing all your relatives wore the same embarrassing shirt for every family picture. Jokes about local characters are delivered by white actors in heavy makeup, and the humor leans hard into every stereotype about colonial India, class, and identity. At the time, some tried to defend it as just reflecting history, but that excuse holds less water than a leaky canteen today. In the present, this show is textbook do not air. It's not just out of fashion, it's actively removed from reruns and streaming platforms. There's no saving grace, no, it was a product of its time pass. If you need a cautionary tale about comedy that doesn't age well, this is it. The best thing about It Ain't Half Hot Mum is how quickly people learn to move on. Are You Being Served? 1972 to 1985. Step inside the fictional Grace Brothers department store, and you'll find a world where nothing is sacred and every gag is another nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Are You Being Served? Built an empire on double meanings, leering glances, and characters who were little more than walking punchlines. You've got Mr. Humphreys, whose every line is delivered with a flourish and a knowing grin, and Mrs. Slocum, whose hair color changes as fast as her suggestive quips. The humor is relentless, innuendo after innuendo, with a side of casual sexism and camp stereotypes. The show didn't just skirt the edge of appropriateness, it set up camp there and sent postcards. In its day, people loved it for its cheek and brashness. But now, you'd need a content warning before the opening credits, and a debrief after. Critics point out that its jokes about women, the camp assistant, and generational differences don't just date the show, they make it a walking exhibit of what's no longer okay. Try running Are You Being Served? In prime time now, and you'd have as many complaints as viewers. It's a show that thrived on bending the rules, but those rules have changed. What once made audiences howl now makes them squirm. For better or worse, this department store is permanently closed for business. On the buses, 1969 to 1973. Hop aboard the number 11 and hold tight, because On the Buses isn't just a time capsule, it's a masterclass in everything modern TV tries to avoid. The show follows Stan Butler and Jack Harper, two bus depot employees whose main mission in life is dodging work and chasing women. That's it. Plot lines are less about driving routes and more about how many birds they can chat up while dodging their boss, the eternally frustrated Inspector Blakey. The humor is low-hanging fruit. Constant jokes about wives, mothers-in-law, and saucy escapades. Every woman is either a nag, a conquest, or the punchline of another bus stop joke. Stan's sister Olive gets it worst. Endless digs about her looks, her marriage, and her so-called domestic skills. Even at the time, critics rolled their eyes at the never-ending cycle of laddish one-liners. But audiences kept coming back for more, and On the Buses became a juggernaut, spawning 3 movies and a West End spin-off. Fast forward to now, and the show looks painfully out of place. The relentless objectification and stereotype-heavy humor would be flagged and canceled faster than you can say, "Get that bus out." Try rerunning it in 2025, and you'll see more complaints than ticket stubs. It's a throwback, all right, but not one anyone's rushing to revisit. Sometimes, the past really is best left behind at the depot. Till Death Us Do Part, 1965 to 1975. Meet Alf Garnett, TV's original grumpy old man with a mouth like a runaway freight train. Till Death Us Do Part didn't just flirt with controversy, it wined and dined it. Alf is a bigot, loudmouth, and self-proclaimed authority on everything, tossing out insults at anyone who isn't exactly like him. He rails against neighbors, politicians, his own family, and pretty much every group you can think of. The big idea, according to creator Johnny Spite, was to satirize small-mindedness by making Alf so outrageous that audiences would laugh at him, not with him. But here's the problem. A lot of viewers did both. His tirades, peppered with outdated words and opinions, became catchphrases in homes across Britain. Critics argued whether the show was brilliant satire or just an excuse for people to laugh at the very prejudices it claimed to mock. Bring Alf back today, and you'd have a public outcry before the theme song even finished. Networks would be buried in complaints, think pieces, and debates about what constitutes satire. In the streaming age, where every word gets analyzed and dissected, Alf Garnett's living room would have its curtains drawn for good. The legacy? A reminder that just because something was once called cutting edge doesn't mean it's not a razor you'll cut yourself on now. Curry and Chips, 1969. How far can you push the boundaries before the whole set falls over? Curry and Chips found out the hard way, lasting only 6 episodes before the plug was firmly pulled. The premise: a new worker joins a British factory, but he isn't like the others. He's half Irish, half Indian, played by Spike Milligan in dark makeup. The entire show is built around his outsider status and the endless barrage of jokes, jibes, and outright offensive gags from his co-workers. When Curry and Chips aired, the creators insisted they were lampooning racism, not encouraging it. The result, though, is scene after scene of stereotypes so broad they make your jaw drop. It's awkward to watch now, but even then, regulators quickly called time. The Independent Broadcasting Authority stepped in and canceled the show, not for low ratings, but because it was just too much, even for 1969. Try airing something like this in the 2020s, and you'd have a full-on PR disaster before lunch. There's no clever subtext, no wink to the audience, just uncomfortable, relentless jokes that aged about as well as milk in the sun. Sometimes a show's legacy is a warning. Curry and Chips is one of those warnings in flashing neon lights. The Benny Hill Show, 1955 to 1989. You know the music, you know the chase scenes, and if you've ever seen late-night reruns, you know Benny Hill never missed a chance for a cheeky joke. The Benny Hill Show was a British comedy phenomenon, decades of slapstick, wordplay, and women in glamorous outfits. For years, Benny's brand of humor was pure primetime gold. Zany sketches, rapid-fire costume changes, and that famous closing chase, everyone tearing across the screen like they were late for dinner. But take a closer look and you'll spot something else. Endless jokes at the expense of women, the elderly, foreigners, and just about anyone who wandered into frame. Benny's sketches often revolved around ogling, smirking, and a wink-wink, nudge-nudge attitude that feels almost prehistoric now. Today, the chase music would be the sound of censors and critics running after the producers. The humor is unapologetically dated, sometimes bordering on mean-spirited. What once passed for cheeky now comes off as clueless at best. The Benny Hill Show isn't just a relic, it's a whole museum wing for comedy you couldn't make now. Love the slapstick if you must, but don't expect a comeback anytime soon. Some Mothers Do Ave Em, 1973 to 1978. Frank Spencer, the original disaster magnet. Some Mothers Do Ave Em gave us one of Britain's most iconic sitcom characters, an accident-prone, well-meaning everyman whose day is a domino rally of chaos. Frank's physical comedy, legendary gaffes, and Michael Crawford's rubber-limbed performance won millions of fans. But beneath the bumbling innocence is a streak of humor that today's viewers might find a bit too old-fashioned. The running jokes? Frank's lack of manliness, his nervous wife Betty, and endless digs about their marriage. There's a whole cottage industry of punchlines about incompetent husbands and nagging wives. At the time, it was seen as harmless fun. Frank is so naive and childlike. How could anyone be offended? But these days, that's not how it lands. The gender stereotypes, the useless men routine, and endless scenes of Betty picking up the pieces feel like fossils from another era. It's not mean-spirited, but it's undeniably dated. The gags about Frank's blunders and the people rolling their eyes at him would trigger a wave of think pieces and social media threads now. Some Mothers Do Ave Em still has a special place in TV history, but if it launched today, it would likely stumble straight into the cancel bin. Sometimes the biggest accidents are the ones you don't see coming. The Black and White Minstrel Show, 1958 to 1978. Let's not sugarcoat it, this one is almost impossible to believe even aired on the BBC for 20 years. The Black and White Minstrel Show featured white performers donning makeup to perform minstrel songs and variety numbers in what was then considered light entertainment. The sets were extravagant, the tap dancing was tight, and the costumes were straight from a vaudeville fever dream. But the main act? Performers in full blackface, singing traditional tunes to a primetime audience. Decades later, it's held up as Exhibit A for what not to do in TV history classes. Even during its heyday, criticism grew louder with every year, and eventually, public outcry forced its cancellation. Today, the very idea of such a show making it to air would set off alarms at every level of production. There is no, well, it was a product of its time argument strong enough to rescue this one from the dustbin. Networks now run from this chapter in broadcasting as if it were radioactive. Modern TV standards would have canned the show before the first dress rehearsal. Its legacy, a sharp lesson in why nostalgia doesn't always mean worth celebrating. It stands as a warning that some entertainment is best left out of the rerun vault and kept firmly in the history books as a reminder of how far we've come. Keeping Up appearances 1990 to 1995. On the surface, Keeping Up. Appearances looks harmless enough. Hyacinth Bucket, Britain's queen of snobbery, is forever trying to drag her family into high society, whether they want to go or not. But for all its gentle lampooning, this sitcom serves up a steady stream of jokes at the expense of working-class characters, eccentric relatives, and anyone who doesn't fit Hyacinth's vision of respectability. It's classic British class comedy, but the punchlines come from punching down. Hyacinth's desperate attempts to keep up with the Joneses or the Onslows are mined for laughs, while her relatives are painted as embarrassing, lazy, or clueless. In the 90s, it felt like cozy fun. Today, the social divide and mocking of common folks hits a little differently. The tone is rarely cruel, but it's not exactly warm either. Modern comedy is more likely to punch up or find the heart in its oddballs. Keeping Up appearances, for all its legacy, would be dissected on social media within hours for classism and snobbery. Could it air now? Maybe after a rewrite and a lot of sensitivity notes. But in its original form, Hyacinth's world would have the critics at her door, and the Bucket residence would be closed for renovations. Up Pompeii, 1969 to 1970. You can't talk classic British comedy without running into Frankie Howard's double entendres, and nowhere is that more gleefully obvious than Up Pompeii. This ancient Rome sitcom is wall-to-wall puns, camp mugging, and enough cheeky jokes to fuel a dozen carry-on movies. Howard plays Lucio, a slave who comments directly to the audience about every saucy situation around him, breaking the fourth wall with all the subtlety of a runaway chariot. Back then, the innuendo was considered daring, and audiences howled. These days, every episode feels like a running joke about what you can't say anymore. There's constant riffing on people's looks, behaviors, and relationships, all played for big, broad laughs. The main draw, its fearless approach to what was considered taboo, is also what makes it an instant target for cancel culture today. The writers squeezed every ounce of humor from double meanings, sometimes stretching things so far you wonder how the scripts got past the censors even then. In the modern world, where every gag gets scrutinized, Up Pompeii would have the compliance team working overtime and the "did they just say that?" crowd on high alert. Its legend endures, but its license to air would be revoked on arrival. Little Britain, 2003 to 2007. It's hard to believe Little Britain is barely 20 years old, and even harder to believe just how quickly the ground shifted beneath it. Matt Lucas and David Walliams created a sketch show that became a pop culture phenomenon, spinning out catchphrases, characters, and impressions that everyone seemed to repeat. But the secret sauce? Most of those laughs came at the expense of stereotypes about race, gender, class, and disability. Blackface characters, fat jokes, and mocking marginalized people were front and center. It didn't take long for the tide to turn. By the late 2010s, streaming services began quietly dropping episodes and cutting sketches, while both creators issued public apologies. What was once outrageous fun became a cautionary tale about how fast the social climate can change. Even devoted fans now admit you simply couldn't make Little Britain today. The material is just too risky, and the potential backlash is huge. If you ever need proof that what's funny in one era can be off limits in the next, look no further. Little Britain is an archive item now, talked about, dissected, but very unlikely to see a reboot. Its characters are legendary, but its time is up. Drop your pick in the comments, subscribe for more unfiltered truth, and remember, nostalgia doesn't always age gracefully.